He thought humiliating her would earn him applause, but before the hour ended, Professor Jonathan Reeves would wish he had never spoken her name. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The October air outside Halstead University carried a sharp chill, but inside Whitmore Hall, the atmosphere burned with anticipation. Rows of polished wooden seats climbed toward the high ceiling, every one of them filled. Graduate students adjusted laptops. Visiting faculty whispered to one another, and cameras from the university media office stood ready near the back wall. At exactly 9 o'clock, the side door opened, and Professor Jonathan Reeves entered with the confidence of a man who had never once doubted his own importance. His charcoal suit fit perfectly, his silver tie clip caught the overhead lights, and the leather folder tucked beneath his arm looked expensive enough to make a statement on its own. Reeves was more than a professor. He was the mathematics department's star, the author of best-selling textbooks, the face donors loved to photograph. He moved to the podium without hurrying because powerful men knew the room would wait. And it did. The whispers vanished. Even the squeak of a chair leg stopped. Reeves placed his folder down, scanned the hall, and gave the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. Today, he announced, we discuss advanced multivariable calculus, though I understand not everyone here will be able to follow. A ripple of polite laughter moved through the audience. He enjoyed that sound. Then his gaze drifted upward to the back row and settled on a woman seated alone. She wore a faded blue cardigan over a plain white blouse. A spiral notebook rested on her lap, its corners bent with use. Her hair was tied back simply, and she sat with quiet stillness while others shifted around her. She looked out of place among designer coats and tailored blazers, and Reeves noticed immediately. Men like him always did. Interesting, he said, pausing mid-sentence. We seem to have opened registration to the general public. More laughter, louder this time. Several students turned to look. The woman did not react. She only lowered her eyes to her notebook and uncapped a pen. Reeves leaned one hand on the podium. You there in the cardigan. If you're going to sit in my lecture, at least try not to look confused. This time the room broke completely. Some students laughed openly. Others glanced at one another, embarrassed but unwilling to resist the current. A few professors smirked into their coffee cups. The woman slowly looked up. Her expression remained calm, almost unreadable. No anger, no panic, no plea for mercy. Just steady eyes meeting the professor who had tried to reduce her to a joke. I'm taking notes, she said softly. Her voice was clear enough to carry. Reeves raised an eyebrow. Then perhaps write faster. We move quickly in here. The room laughed again, though not as confidently. Something in her composure unsettled them. She nodded once and returned to the page. Reeves turned back to the board, convinced he had won another easy moment. Chalk moved sharply across black slate as symbols and equations spread in elegant lines. Yet while he lectured, several eyes kept drifting to the quiet woman in the back row. She wrote without hesitation, filling page after page, never once asking a question, never once looking lost. And when Reeves reached the theorem he was proudest of, the one he had built his reputation upon, the woman finally stopped writing, lifted her gaze, and a faint smile touched the corner of her mouth. The room did not know it yet, but the balance of power had already begun to change. Professor Jonathan Reeves wrote with theatrical precision, each symbol landing on the board like a signature. Integrals stretched across the slate, partial derivatives branched beneath them, and a final boxed expression sat in the center like a crown jewel. He stepped aside, dusted chalk from his fingers, and faced the audience with satisfaction. This, he said, is the cleanest modern pathway to nonlinear optimization under shifting boundary conditions. It took years of research to refine. Pens moved quickly across the hall. Phones lifted to capture the board. Visiting faculty nodded with practiced seriousness. Reeves enjoyed every second of it. Praise did not merely please him, fed him. In the back row, Sophia Bennett looked quietly at the equation. Her notebook remained open, but she had stopped writing. She studied the center line, then the lower substitution, then the final condition boxed so proudly by the man at the front of the room. Her eyes narrowed only slightly. Beside her, a graduate student leaned over and whispered, "You picked the wrong day to audit." He is impossible when people interrupt. Sophia offered a polite smile and said nothing. Reeves continued pacing. "Most failed attempts collapse at the transition step," he said, tapping the board. "They misunderstand continuity under parameter drift. A common error among inexperienced minds." He let that phrase hang in the air because he knew exactly where it would land. Some students chuckled and glanced toward the back row again. Sophia did not look up. She simply turned one page in her notebook. Reeves clasped his hands behind his back. Questions. Silence followed. No one wanted to risk embarrassment in a room where humiliation had already become entertainment. Reeves waited with a smug patience, then smirked. As expected, a hand rose in the back. Slow, steady, unmistakable. The hall turned almost in unison. Sophia's arm remained raised. Reeves stared for a moment as if deciding whether she was worth acknowledging. "Yes," he said at last, drawing the word out. "Our dedicated note-taker." A few scattered laughs surfaced. Sophia lowered her hand only after he called on her. "I may be mistaken," she said calmly, "but the substitution in line 4 appears to violate your own continuity condition once the parameter exceeds 1. The room froze. Even those who did not fully understand the mathematics understood the danger of what she had just done. Reeves smiled thinly. "Does it?" he asked. "Yes," Sophia replied. "The transition term becomes undefined unless you constrain the derivative first. Otherwise, the final expression cannot hold." A professor near the front straightened in his seat. Another quietly looked back at the board. Reeves gave a soft laugh meant to dismiss, but it landed weakly. "And your background in advanced calculus is what exactly?" he asked. "Facilities." More laughter came, though uncertain now. Sophia met his gaze. "Private study." Reeves spread his arms. "Of course." He turned to the audience. "This is what happens when confidence outruns competence." Then he faced her again. "If you believe there is an error, Miss Bennett, perhaps you would like to demonstrate it for us." Murmurs swept the hall. Everyone understood the trap. He pointed toward the stairs leading down to the stage. "Come to the board," he said. "Please enlighten us." Several students exchanged excited looks. Cameras subtly angled forward. Reeves stepped aside with a smile sharpened by pride. Sophia closed her notebook, placed the pen carefully inside the spiral binding, and rose from her seat. The sound of the chair folding upward echoed louder than it should have. She began walking down the aisle in measured steps, cardigan brushing softly against the seats she passed. Some people smirked. Others looked uneasy. Near the front row, an older visiting scholar removed his glasses and watched with sudden interest. Reeves offered her a stick of chalk like a king granting permission. Sophia accepted it, turned to the board, and for the first time that morning, the great Professor Jonathan Reeves looked uncertain. Sophia Bennett stood before the blackboard with the chalk resting lightly between her fingers. The hall watched as if expecting hesitation, panic, or the quick collapse of someone who had stepped too far. Professor Jonathan Reeves folded his arms and leaned against the desk, wearing the patient smile of a man certain humiliation was only seconds away. "Take your time," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Advanced mathematics can be overwhelming." A few students laughed on cue. Sophia did not turn around. She looked at the equation in silence, tracing each line with her eyes. The chalk remained still. 5 seconds passed, then 10. Reeves glanced toward the audience with a satisfied shrug. "If you would prefer to return to your seat," he said, "there is no shame in recognizing your limits." Sophia finally moved, but instead of writing, she lifted the eraser and calmly removed the boxed conclusion in the center of the board. Gasps slipped through the room. Reeves straightened immediately. "Excuse me?" he said. Sophia continued, erasing the lower transition line next, then the substitution beneath it. White chalk dust drifted through the stage lights like falling snow. "What are you doing?" Reeves demanded, taking one step forward. Sophia set the eraser down and faced the board again. "Removing the part that fails," she said softly. The room went silent. No coughs. No whispers. Even the cameras stopped adjusting. Reeves forced a laugh, but it sounded brittle. "By all means," he said. "Please replace years of published work with whatever you discovered in your notebook." Sophia touched the chalk to the board. Her first line was clean and direct. Then another. Then another. Symbols flowed in a sequence so orderly that several students instinctively leaned forward. She redefined the transition condition in 3 steps, introduced a constrained derivative term, then transformed the parameter boundary with elegant efficiency. Reeves' smile faded line by line. A professor near the front slowly removed his glasses. Another began copying her work at remarkable speed. Sophia never rushed, yet she never paused. It was the movement of someone translating a language she knew by heart. Reeves stepped closer, eyes scanning the board. "That notation is unconventional," he said sharply. "Only because the conventional version hides the instability," Sophia replied without turning. A few heads snapped toward Reeves. She continued writing. The final portion arrived faster than anyone expected. She simplified the entire expression into a shorter proof than the one Reeves had presented, then boxed a new conclusion in one smooth motion. The chalk clicked softly as she placed it on the tray. She stepped aside. No one moved. Reeves stared at the board as if it had betrayed him. He approached, reading each line, then reading them again. His jaw tightened. He checked the transition term. He checked the derivative constraint. He checked the final result. Nothing broke. Nothing failed. In the front row, the older visiting scholar rose to his feet. "Remarkable," he said quietly. His voice carried farther than shouting would have. "That is mathematically sound." Murmurs spread instantly. Students looked from the board to Reeves and back again. Several phones lifted higher. One graduate student whispered, "She shortened the proof by half." Another answered, "And fixed it." Reeves turned slowly. "Who are you?" he asked, the question stripped of all arrogance now. Sophia picked up her notebook from the desk where she had set it. "Someone who noticed line 4, she said. Soft laughter moved through the hall, but this time it was not for her. Color rose in Reeves' face. He reached for authority like a man reaching for a railing that was no longer there. "You rehearsed this," he said. "You came prepared." Sophia met his eyes calmly. "No, Professor. I came to listen." The room fell into a deeper silence than before, because everyone present understood that pride had just been corrected in public, and it had happened with nothing more than chalk, patience, and truth. No one applauded at first because the room was still trying to understand what it had just witnessed. Professor Jonathan Reeves remained inches from the board, reading Sophia Bennett's proof for a 3rd time, then a 4th. His finger traced the revised boundary condition as if pressure alone might reveal a flaw. It did not. The older visiting scholar stepped fully into the aisle and adjusted his jacket. "Professor Harold Whitaker, Princeton," he said, introducing himself only after everyone had already recognized him. "Miss Bennett, your reduction of the instability term is unusually elegant." The silence broke into murmurs at once. Students whispered names. Faculty exchanged glances. Reeves slowly turned from the board, recovering the practiced posture that had carried him through years of unchecked admiration. "A clever shortcut," he said, forcing composure. "Interesting, but elegance is not rigor." Sophia stood near the edge of the stage, notebook in hand, calm as ever. "Then test it," she replied. Several students looked at one another. No one had spoken to Reeves that way in this hall. Not rudely, not loudly, simply without fear. Reeves gave a thin smile. "Very well." He grabbed a fresh stick of chalk and wrote a new equation across the far side of the board, longer, denser, designed to intimidate more than instruct. Symbols spilled downward in layers. Since we are entertaining public participation, he said, let us move beyond introductory corrections. Nervous laughter rose from the back rows. This problem has remained unresolved in our department seminar for 6 months. Perhaps you would care to simplify it as well. He stepped aside with a flourish. Sophia glanced at the board once, then at Reeves. That is not unresolved, she said quietly. It is mislabeled. A ripple moved through the hall. Reeves' jaw tightened. Explain. Sophia walked to the board again. She did not ask permission this time. She circled the first line. You classified this as a convergence problem, she said. It is a domain error caused by an assumption made here. She tapped the notation lightly. Reeves opened his mouth, then closed it. She rewrote the opening condition in 2 lines, then erased half the equation because it was no longer needed. Audible gasps followed. Students who had struggled with the problem for months stared, as if a locked door had opened in front of them. Once the assumption is corrected, Sophia continued, the contradiction disappears. She completed the remaining steps in less than 2 minutes. Then she stepped back. Professor Whitaker began clapping first, slow and deliberate. Others joined, then more. Soon the hall filled with applause that rolled up the wooden rows and struck the ceiling beams. Reeves did not clap. He stood rigid beside the podium, hearing the sound that had once belonged to him. A graduate assistant near the front whispered, she solved the seminar problem. Another answered, in under 3 minutes. Reeves lifted a hand for silence. It took longer than he expected for the room to obey. Miss Bennett, he said, voice measured. You seem remarkably prepared for someone with no listed affiliation. Which institution are you representing? Sophia looked at him with almost sympathetic calm. None. Then where did you train? He pressed. Who taught you? Her expression changed for the first time that morning, not into anger but memory. My father, she said. He believed mathematics belonged to anyone willing to be patient with it. The room quieted again. Reeves searched for another angle, another way to reclaim height. And your father was? Sophia opened her notebook, removed a folded photograph, and placed it on the podium beside him. Reeves glanced down. The color left his face. In the photo stood a younger man smiling beside a chalkboard covered in equations. Beneath the image was a signature every mathematician in the room knew. Dr. Leonard Bennett, the late scholar whose textbooks had shaped an entire generation, including Jonathan Reeves himself. A hush fell so completely that even breathing seemed loud. Sophia closed her notebook. You assigned chapter 6 from his work last semester, she said softly. I know because I helped write it when I was 16. The applause faded slowly, not because the audience wished it to end, but because no one wanted to miss what came next. Professor Jonathan Reeves stared at the photograph on the podium as though it had appeared by trickery. Dr. Leonard Bennett's signature rested beneath the image in unmistakable ink. The same signature printed on textbooks across the country. The same scholar Reeves had quoted in lectures, praised in interviews, and cited whenever prestige was useful. Yet he had never once spoken of the daughter standing in front of him. Reeves cleared his throat and straightened his tie. If this is some sort of sentimental performance, he said, forcing a smile, it changes nothing about academic standards. The room reacted with uneasy silence. Even those loyal to him heard the weakness in the sentence. Sophia Bennett slid the photograph back into her notebook. You are right, she said calmly. Standards matter. She looked toward the blackboard where her proofs still covered. The surface. That is why accuracy matters too. A low murmur spread again. Professor Harold Whitaker stepped closer to the board and examined Reeves' original theorem beside Sophia's correction. Jonathan, he said, no title this time. How long have you been presenting that transition model? Reeves kept his eyes forward. 3 years. Whitaker nodded slowly. Then for 3 years no one challenged it. That concerns me more than the mistake itself. Several faculty members lowered their gaze. Students shifted in their seats. They all understood the meaning. Error was human. Intimidation was a culture. Reeves felt the room slipping farther from him with every second. He reached for authority once more. "Miss Bennet is not enrolled here," he said sharply. "This symposium is for credentialed participants." Sophia answered before anyone else could. "Then why invite questions?" A few students laughed softly. This time Reeves heard it as something different. Not admiration. Not nervous obedience. Freedom. He moved behind the podium, gripping its edges. "Because scholarship depends on discipline," he said. "On structure. On earned expertise." Sophia nodded once. "My father believed that too. He also believed arrogance was the fastest path to intellectual decay." The words landed harder than shouting ever could. The room went still again. Reeves' face tightened. "And where have you been all these years?" he asked. "If you are so gifted, why hide in the back row wearing a cardigan and carrying notebooks like an amateur?" It was meant to wound. Instead, it exposed him. Sophia's voice remained gentle. "I was caring for my father during his final illness, then caring for my mother after, then working 2 jobs because life does not pause for talent." Students who had laughed at her earlier now looked ashamed. "At night," she continued, "I kept studying, not for applause, not for titles, because I loved the subject." A young woman in the second row quietly wiped her eyes. Reeves said nothing. There was nothing safe left to say. Whitaker turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, remember this moment carefully. Many minds are overlooked because some rooms mistake polish for substance." Heads nodded across the hall. One student began clapping, then another. Soon the applause returned, louder than before, not merely for Sophia's mathematics, but for what she represented. Reeves remained motionless behind the podium while the sound filled the hall that once belonged to him. Sophia picked up her notebook and stepped toward the aisle. "Miss Bennet," Whitaker called after her, "would you consider speaking at Princeton this spring?" Gasps and whispers raced through the seats. Sophia paused, then smiled modestly. "If my work schedule allows." More laughter, warm this time. She started up the stairs toward the exit. As she passed rows of students, they moved their feet aside, sat straighter, and watched with a respect no title could command. Jonathan Reeves looked at the crowded room, then at the board, then at the woman walking away. For the first time in many years, he understood what it felt like to be the least impressive person in the room. Sophia Bennet had almost reached the double doors of Whitmore Hall when a voice behind her called out, "Wait!" She turned. It was not Professor Jonathan Reeves. It was a young man from the third row, one of the students who had laughed earlier. His cheeks were red with embarrassment, and he held a calculus textbook tightly against his chest. "I am sorry," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I should not have laughed." The hallway outside the auditorium fell quiet. Sophia studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Learning begins the moment pride ends," she said. The student lowered his eyes, grateful and ashamed at once. Others began spilling into the hallway in clusters, buzzing with disbelief. Some rushed to compare notes. Some replayed the scene on their phones. Some simply stared at Sophia as if genius were supposed to look different. Inside the hall, Professor Jonathan Reeves remained alone near the podium while maintenance staff quietly wheeled in ladders for the next event setup. The blackboard still displayed 2 versions of the same truth, the one built on ego and the one built on clarity. Reeves loosened his tie and read Sophia's proof again. It was still correct. More painful than being wrong was knowing she had corrected him with grace. Dean Margaret Holloway entered through the side door carrying a tablet and a face sharpened by concern. "Jonathan," she said evenly, "my office. 10 minutes. He looked up. "This is being exaggerated." "The entire symposium was live-streamed," she replied. "Nothing needs exaggeration." She turned and walked out. Reeves followed without another word. Across campus, the afternoon sun lit brick walkways and yellow maple leaves. Sophia sat alone on a bench near the mathematics library, opening the same worn notebook she had carried for years. Inside were pages of handwritten proofs, margins full of tiny corrections, and old coffee stains earned during late nights after long shifts. Her phone buzzed for the first time in months. Unknown numbers, academic emails, media requests. One message stood apart. It was from Professor Harold Whitaker. Your father once told me you saw patterns before others saw symbols. He was right. Please call when ready. Sophia smiled faintly and set the phone face down. Attention had never been the goal. Peace had been. A shadow crossed the bench. She looked up to see Dean Holloway standing there. Miss Bennett, the dean said, gentler now than she had ever sounded in faculty meetings. May I sit? Sophia nodded. Holloway sat beside her and looked toward the library tower. You embarrassed one of my most celebrated professors today, she said. He embarrassed himself, Sophia replied softly. Holloway exhaled, then almost smiled. Fair enough. For a moment they watched students hurry by with backpacks and coffee cups, each carrying invisible battles of their own. I reviewed your background, the dean said. Your father donated half the rare texts in our archives. You were listed as co-editor on unpublished notes found after his passing. Sophia traced the edge of her notebook. He let me help. He trusted you, Holloway corrected. The dean turned toward her fully. Halstead University would like to offer you a visiting fellowship, full access to our research facilities, and a stipend. We would also like you to teach one seminar next semester. Sophia looked genuinely surprised. I work mornings at a bookstore and evenings at a grocery store. Then perhaps, Holloway said, it is time you worked somewhere that understands your value. The breeze lifted a few leaves across the path. Students nearby recognized Sophia and whispered her name, but none approached. Respect had replaced curiosity. Sophia remained silent for several seconds. Then she asked the only question that mattered to her. Would I be allowed to teach students who think they do not belong? Holloway answered immediately. Especially them. Sophia closed her notebook and stood. Then I will consider it. As they walked toward the administration building together, windows across campus reflected the fading sunlight. And in an office 3 floors above, Jonathan Reeves sat alone before a dark computer screen, finally learning that reputation can be built over decades and undone in one honest afternoon. By sunrise the next morning, Halstead University had become the center of every academic group chat in the country. Clips from the symposium spread across social media, replaying the moment Sophia Bennett erased Professor Jonathan Reeves' theorem and rebuilt it in front of a packed hall. Headlines praised brilliance, debated elitism, and questioned how many voices had been ignored in classrooms like his. Students crossed campus with phones in hand, showing one another the now famous line, removing the part that fails. In the mathematics building, faculty doors remained closed longer than usual. Inside conference rooms, polished reputations were being measured against public memory. Sophia arrived on campus just after 8, carrying the same worn notebook and a paper cup of coffee from a corner diner. She wore the same blue cardigan. Nothing about her appearance suggested that she had become the most talked about person at Halstead overnight. She entered the bookstore for her morning shift and began shelving used texts in the science aisle. A freshman recognized her first, then another. Soon a quiet line formed, not for autographs, but for advice. How do I get better at math? One asked nervously. How do I stop feeling stupid in class? Asked another. Sophia smiled with patient kindness. You are not behind, she told them. You are learning. Those are different things. Word spread quickly that she was at the bookstore. By 10 o'clock, Dean Margaret Holloway arrived with 2 department chairs and found Sophia kneeling beside a lower shelf, alphabetizing statistics manuals. Miss Bennett, the dean said, almost amused by the scene. I had hoped to reach you before half the student body did. Sophia stood and brushed dust from her sleeves. Books still need shelving, she replied. Holloway glanced at the growing crowd nearby. Apparently so do futures. She handed Sophia an envelope embossed with the university seal. Inside was a formal offer. Visiting fellow in applied mathematics, immediate start date, private office, research grant, and full teaching authority. Sophia read it quietly. This is generous, she said. "It is overdue," Holloway answered. Across campus, Jonathan Reeves sat before a disciplinary panel in a room lined with portraits of former presidents. 3 trustees, 2 faculty senators, and the dean reviewed transcripts from the symposium. Reeves attempted composure, but his voice had lost its old certainty. "My methods are demanding," he said. "That is not misconduct." A trustee folded her hands. "Demanding students is not the issue, Professor. Demeaning them is." Another added, "Your theorem review committee has also identified errors in 2 published presentations." Reeves stared ahead. For years, confidence had covered cracks no one dared inspect. Now scrutiny had arrived all at once. At noon, Sophia was escorted to an empty office overlooking the central quad. Sunlight crossed the hardwood floor. A chalkboard covered one wall. On the desk sat a fresh box of white chalk and a note from Professor Harold Whitaker. It read, "For the work still waiting to be done." She touched the chalk box gently, then opened her notebook beside it. Page after page held ideas she had postponed while stocking shelves, caring for family, and working double shifts. Dreams delayed were not dreams erased. A knock sounded at the door. It was the young student who had apologized in the hallway. He held a calculus workbook under one arm. "I heard this might be your office," he said. "I just wanted to ask if you are really teaching next semester." Sophia looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." The student smiled with visible relief. "Then I am switching sections." After he left, Sophia stood by the window and watched students crossing the quad below, each carrying books, burdens, and private doubts. For years she had hidden in the back row of rooms built to impress people like Jonathan Reeves. Now she stood at the front of one. And somewhere else on campus, a man who once loved hearing himself speak was learning how loud silence can become. 1 week later, every seat in Whitmore Hall was filled 30 minutes before class began. Students lined the walls, sat on steps, and crowded the doorway hoping someone would leave. The room had hosted famous lectures, donor ceremonies, and televised debates, yet it had never felt like this. There was no celebrity on the poster outside. No best-selling author. No decorated professor with framed credentials. Only a printed sheet that read Introduction to Calculus with Sophia Bennett. The simplicity of it somehow made the crowd larger. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, catching dust in the air like floating sparks. Voices buzzed with curiosity. Could she really teach? Was her brilliance only performance? Would she mention what happened to Jonathan Reeves? At exactly 9 o'clock, the side door opened. Sophia entered carrying a canvas tote bag and the same worn notebook. She wore a cream sweater, dark slacks, and practical shoes. No entourage. No dramatic entrance. The room quieted on its own. She placed the tote on the desk, looked across the packed hall, and smiled as though seeing neighbors rather than strangers. "Good morning," she said. "You may have come for a story. I hope you stay for mathematics." Soft laughter warmed the room instantly. She picked up a piece of chalk and wrote one sentence across the board in clean letters. "Calculus is the language of change." Then she turned back. "That means if your life has ever changed, you already understand the subject. Better than you think." Pens moved. Phones lowered. Students leaned forward. She spoke without arrogance, without performance, and without trying to sound brilliant. She used roads, rainfall, grocery budgets, heartbeats, and baseball trajectories to explain rates and motion. When a nervous freshman admitted he had failed algebra twice, Sophia thanked him for his honesty and used his question to teach half the room. When another student apologized for asking something basic, she gently replied, "There are no embarrassing questions. Only expensive silence." Laughter broke out again, followed by quick note-taking. Outside the hall, faculty who had come only to observe remained in the doorway longer than planned. Even Dean Margaret Holloway stood near the back with folded arms and a quiet smile. Midway through class, the rear door opened once more. Jonathan Reeves stepped inside wearing a plain navy blazer. No tie, no audience trailing behind him. Conversations died at once. He had been placed on administrative leave pending review, and whispers followed him like weather. He remained near the wall, saying nothing. Sophia noticed him, then continued teaching as though every person in the room deserved equal treatment. She solved a limit problem in 3 steps, then invited volunteers to solve the next one. Hands shot up across the hall. Something Reeves had never managed with intimidation happened naturally in her presence. Students wanted to participate. Near the end of class, Sophia closed her notebook. "Before we go," she said, "I want you to remember something. Struggling does not mean you are incapable. It means you are in the middle of learning." The room rose into applause before she could continue. Some students stood. Others wiped their eyes, embarrassed by how much they needed to hear those words. Sophia glanced toward the back wall. Reeves remained there, hands at his sides, watching the ovation meant for someone he once dismissed. After the room began to empty, he approached the front slowly. For the first time, there was no stage between them. "Miss Bennett," he said quietly, "you have a gift." Sophia placed chalk back in the tray. "So did you," she answered. "You just used it to protect your pride." He lowered his gaze. No defense came, no clever reply, only silence. She gathered her tote bag and walked past him toward the aisle where students waited with questions. Reeves turned and looked at the board she had filled with simple truths and clear steps. Then he looked at the crowd surrounding her. In all his years chasing respect, he had mistaken fear for admiration, and now he had to watch the difference with no place left to hide. 3 months later, winter light lay softly across Halstead University, turning the old brick paths silver in the early morning frost. Students hurried between buildings with scarves pulled high and coffee warming their hands. Inside Whitmore Hall, every section of Sophia Bennett's calculus course had a waiting list. Her office hours stretched into evenings. The once quiet room overlooking the quad now held stacks of notebooks, thank you cards, and handwritten letters from students who had nearly given up before finding her class. Some said they had changed majors to mathematics. Others said they had simply changed how they saw themselves. Sophia read every letter and kept them in a drawer beside her father's photograph. She still arrived early, erased boards herself, and greeted custodial staff by name. Success had reached her, but it had not altered her pace. On the final day of the semester, Whitmore Hall filled again. Not with reporters this time, and not with curiosity. It filled with students who wanted to be there. Sophia stood at the front beneath the same lights that had once watched her be mocked. She wrote one final equation on the board, then set the chalk down. This course was never only about derivatives or limits, she said. It was about learning that difficulty is not a verdict. It is an invitation. The room listened with the kind of silence that comes from respect. Many of you entered this hall believing you were not the type of person who belongs in mathematics. I hope you leave knowing that talent does not check clothing labels, family income, age, accent, or fear. It asks only for patience. Several students lowered their eyes, moved more deeply than they expected. In the back row sat Jonathan Reeves. He had attended quietly for weeks, never speaking, never interrupting, always arriving early and leaving last. The review board had removed him from department leadership and reassigned him to curriculum work under supervision. For a man once addicted to status, anonymity had become a difficult teacher. Yet he kept returning. After class ended, students surrounded Sophia with gratitude, laughter, and last-minute questions about finals. She answered each one. Eventually the hall emptied, leaving only the echo of footsteps and winter sunlight stretching across the seats. Reeves remained in the back until the room was nearly bare. Then he walked down the aisle slowly, carrying a worn hardcover book. It was an old edition of Leonard Bennett's text, edges frayed, margins full of notes. He placed it gently on the front desk. "I bought this in graduate school," he said. "Your father's work shaped my career." Sophia glanced at the handwriting filling the margins. "You studied it carefully." Reeves nodded. "I studied the mathematics. I ignored the character of the man who wrote it." He took a breath that seemed heavier than any lecture he had given. "I owe you an apology. Publicly would be fair." Privately is where I can speak honestly. I was threatened by what I did not expect, and I punished you for it. Sophia listened without triumph. What will you do now? She asked. Reeves looked around the hall. Learn how to teach without needing to feel taller than everyone else. For the first time, she saw no performance in him. Only humility, awkward and unfinished, but real. She slid the book back toward him. Then start by keeping this. You still have notes to write.